Before the sun rose over the walls of Jerusalem, there was a secret hidden in the shadows of the Assyrian camp. A deadly secret that would change the course of history in a single night. Silence, expectation, terror. It was the year 701 before Christ. During the reign of King Hezekiah of Judah, a devout monarch who had restored the temple and defied the most powerful empire of his time. Syria, the beast from the north, with its invincible armies and insatiable thirst for conquest, had devoured entire nations without mercy. Sennacherib, the proud Assyrian king, commanded the most fearsome army the world knew then. His 185,000 soldiers covered the fields around Jerusalem like hungry locusts, their banners waving threateningly under the scorching sun of Judah. The siege was approaching, the holy city, the last bastion of resistance against pagan domination. Inside the walls, the people trembled. But Hezekiah, son of Ahaz, descendant of the great King David, looked toward the starry sky with unwavering faith. His lips murmured an ancient prayer, a plea for divine intervention in the face of the inevitable massacre that was approaching. "My Lord," he whispered in the stillness of the temple, "only you can save us now." And in the celestial heights, invisible to mortal eyes, a being of light and fire prepared its flaming sword. The angel of the Lord, executor of divine justice, awaited only the command to descend to earth with devastating power. That night the wind completely ceased. An unnatural silence fell over the valley. In the Assyrian tents, officers prematurely toasted their victory while planning the final attack for the next dawn. "Tomorrow," proclaimed Rabshakeh, Sennacherib's general, "Jerusalem will fall like all the other cities. Their God will not be able to save them any more than the gods of Hamath or Apad saved their people." Laughter resonated through the royal tent. But an old counselor felt a chill run down his spine. He looked toward the starless sky and felt in some inexplicable way that forces beyond human comprehension were moving in the shadows of that night. And so, while an invisible clock moved toward the hour of divine intervention, two worlds, the celestial and the earthly, prepared for an encounter that would be remembered for millennia. It was the 14th year of Hezekiah's reign, a time of unprecedented trial for the small kingdom of Judah. After the fall of the northern brother kingdom, Israel at the hands of the Assyrians, Judah remained as the last guardian of faith in the true God. Hezekiah was not an ordinary man. From his ascension to the throne, he devoted himself to purifying the land of idols, restoring the temple, and renewing the covenant with the Lord. "I will trust in the God of Israel," he declared to the people gathered in the newly purified temple. "For he alone is the shield and fortress of Judah." Sennacherib, on the other hand, personified earthly power in its most brutal form. His empire stretched from the mountains of Persia to the plains of Egypt. Kings trembled at the mere whisper of his name, and entire cities were razed at the slightest sign of resistance. "No God has ever saved his people from my hands," he boasted in inscriptions carved in stone throughout his empire. "I'm the scourge sent by the great gods of Assyria to punish the rebels." The conflict between these two men, a humble servant of the invisible God and a tyrant who considered himself almost divine, was about to culminate in a confrontation of cosmic proportions. The first news of the Assyrian invasion reached Jerusalem through exhausted refugees. "They come like a storm," shouted men covered in dust and blood. "Lachish has fallen. All the fortified cities are being destroyed." Hezekiah summoned his council. Some advocated immediate surrender, others suggested alliances with Egypt. But the prophet Isaiah, with his burning eyes and white beard, entered the council chamber unannounced. "Thus says the Lord," he proclaimed in thunder's voice, "do not fear the Assyrian who threatens you with arrogant words. I will put a spirit in him, and he will hear a rumor and return to his land where he will fall by the sword." That same night, 3 Assyrian emissaries arrived at the gates of Jerusalem. Rabshakeh, Sennacherib's spokesman, spoke loudly so that everyone on the walls could hear. "What do you trust in to resist? Egypt is a broken reed that pierces the hand of whoever leans on it. And if you say we trust in the Lord our God, isn't that the same one whose altars Hezekiah removed, Silence fell over the walls, broken only by the hot desert wind. The hour of Jerusalem's greatest test had come. The rising sun illuminated the vast expanse of the Assyrian camp. Countless tents covered the hills around Jerusalem like a metallic plague. The noise of thousands of men preparing their weapons created a terrifying symphony that resonated through the valleys inside the besieged city. Hezekiah tore his garments upon receiving Sennacherib's letter. The words contained in it were pure blasphemy. Do not let your God in whom you trust deceive you. When he says Jerusalem will not be delivered into the hands of the king of Assyria. Surely you have heard what the kings of Assyria have done to all countries, completely destroying them. And will you be delivered? The king of Judah, with determined steps, went to the temple there, in the most sacred place of his nation. He spread the blasphemous letter before the altar and raised his voice in a prayer that would resonate through the centuries. Lord God of Israel, enthroned between the cherubim, you alone are God over all the kingdoms of the earth. Incline your ears, Lord, and hear. Open your eyes and see the words of Sennacherib, who mocks the living God. It is true, Lord, that the Assyrian kings have destroyed nations and thrown their gods into the fire. But those were not gods, only works of human hands, wood and stone. Now, Lord our God, deliver us from his hands, so that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you alone, Lord, our God. Meanwhile, in the Assyrian camp, Sennacherib was receiving reports from his generals. The siege was almost complete. The war machines, battering rams, assault towers, catapults were positioned. Jerusalem's water had been cut off. It was only a matter of time. Tomorrow, declared the Assyrian king, Jerusalem will join the list of cities that dare to defy Assyria. We will not leave stone upon stone in the royal tent. Decorated with treasures, looted from 100 conquered nations, Sennacherib drank wine from gold cups stolen from foreign temples. Around him, concubines danced and musicians played, prematurely celebrating the inevitable victory. But in the shadows of the approaching night, a celestial messenger was receiving his final instructions. In the eternal chambers, beyond the veil that separates the visible from the invisible, forces moved in response to the prayer of a righteous king, and a Syrian officer shuddered for no apparent reason and spilled his wine. Do you feel that? He asked a companion. The air, it seems heavy, like before a great storm. The other soldier laughed. It's just the fear of the Jews. You're feeling, tomorrow, their laments will fill these valleys. But the officer could not shake the sensation. Looking toward the starry sky, he felt as if invisible eyes observed every movement in the camp, as if the night itself breathed, waiting for the moment to attack. In the Temple of Jerusalem, the prophet Isaiah prostrated in prayer when a supernatural light filled the sacred precinct. His eyes, accustomed to divine visions, could barely withstand the brightness of the angelic presence manifesting before him. Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, spoke the celestial messenger, his voice reverberating like the sound of many waters. I've heard your prayer regarding Sennacherib, king of Assyria. This is the word that the Lord has spoken against him. The virgin daughter of Zion despises you and mocks you. The daughter of Jerusalem shakes her head as you flee. The prophecy continued, detailing how the Lord would frustrate the plans of the proud Assyrian monarch, putting a bridle in his nose and a hook in his mouth to lead him back. By the way he came, and this will be the sign for you. Hezekiah, concluded the angel, this year you will eat what grows by itself, and in the second year, what springs from that. But in the third year, sow and reap plant vineyards and eat their fruit. The survivors of the house of Judah will take root downward and bear fruit upward. Isaiah, trembling before the majesty of the vision, received instructions to bring the message to the king. Meanwhile, the sun was setting for the last time over the immense Assyrian army, its golden rays reflecting on the helmets and armor of 185,000, warriors who would not see the next dawn. In the camp, preparations for the final assault were complete. Sennacherib, surrounded by his generals, reviewed the attack plans. Maps of the city were spread on a campaign table, with marks indicating the weak points of the walls. Here pointed the commander of the siege forces. The wall is lower, We will concentrate our forces in this sector at 𝗏𝗏𝗹𝗏𝗏. The royal spokesman smiled with malice. They say their king spent the whole day in the temple, begging his god. Laughter resonated through the command tent, but an old counselor remained silent. He had served under 𝗠ន់ꯙ𝗶𝗏𝗏𝗏 father and witnessed many battles. But something about this siege troubled him deeply. "Majesty," he ventured to say, "perhaps we should consider a treaty. These Jews are known for their tenacity when fighting for their temple." Sennacherib's eyes flashed with fury. "Getting cowardly on the eve of victory, old man? Perhaps your time of usefulness has come to an end." The counselor bowed in submission, but his eyes betrayed concern. As he left the royal tent, he looked toward the night sky, where stars shone with unusual intensity over Jerusalem. A somber premonition assaulted his heart, as if the heavens themselves were about to intervene in the course of human history. Night fell over the land of Judah like a heavy mantle, bringing with it a supernatural silence. In the narrow streets of Jerusalem, families gathered in their homes, lighting lamps and praying one last time before what many feared would be their final day. Mothers embraced their children, whispering promises of protection they didn't know if they could fulfill. In the palace, Hezekiah summoned his most trusted officers. The prophet Isaiah had just transmitted the divine message, a promise of deliverance so extraordinary that few dared to believe completely. "Prepare the men," ordered the king, his voice firm despite the visible tension in his face. "If the Lord delivers the Assyrians into our hands, as promised, we must be ready to pursue them. None of us will sleep tonight." Meanwhile, in the vast Assyrian camp, a strange atmosphere began to form. The air gradually became heavier, denser, as if it were charged with an invisible presence. War dogs, trained to face any mortal enemy without fear, began to howl and retreat to their cages. Restless horses neighed and stomped the ground. A guard on the periphery of the camp felt a chill run down his spine. There was something in the darkness beyond the camp lights, something his eyes couldn't see, but his soul could feel. "Do you see anything?" he asked his companion, his hand nervously gripping the handle of his sword. "Nothing," replied the other. "But do you feel that? It's as if the air itself were alive in the skies, invisible to mortal eyes. A single angel, prepared to fulfill the divine sentence. It was not a creature of delicate wings and golden harp, as artists would later portray it. It was a being of pure light and energy, an executor of celestial justice whose power could reduce mountains to dust. In the eternal chambers the order was given. "Go," commanded the voice of the Most High, "and defend the city that bears my name." With a movement that transcended time and space, the angel of the Lord descended upon the Assyrian camp. Its presence first manifested as a slight luminosity in the air, almost imperceptible like the silver glow that precedes dawn. Sennacherib, in his royal tent, felt an inexplicable discomfort. He rose from his golden bed and walked to the entrance of the tent, parting the embroidered curtains to look at the night sky. "Something is wrong," he murmured to himself, his eyes scanning the stars as if looking for a sign. For an instant so brief that he later convinced himself he had imagined it, he seemed to see a luminous figure floating over his army. At that precise moment, the first Assyrian guard fell silently, as if an invisible breath had extinguished the flame of his life. There were no screams, no blood, just the silence of instantaneous death that began to spread through the camp like an unstoppable wave. Death came like a silent wind, sweeping the Assyrian camp row by row. There was no struggle, no possible resistance against that invisible and implacable enemy. The angel of the Lord moved among the tents like a luminous mist, and wherever it passed, life was extinguished. Soldiers fell in the middle of unfinished sentences. Sentinels collapsed at their posts, eyes still open in expressions of surprise. Captains experienced in 100 battles succumbed without time to unsheathe their swords. A deadly strip of silence expanded from the center of the camp to its edges, in the heart of the army, where the elite soldiers of the royal guard slept. Panic began to spread among the few who perceived what was happening. A young officer waking to change shifts found his commander fallen, the body still warm but lifeless. Two arms, He shouted, his voice breaking the supernatural silence. "We are under attack." But what weapons could defend against a celestial executor? Arrows shot in the darkness pierced only empty air. Swords cut only shadows. It was like fighting against the wind itself. 𝗔𝗃𝗏𝗹𝗶𝗲, torn from his sleep by the alarm cries, stumbled out of his royal tent, surrounded by bodyguards who fell one after another around him. His bulging eyes witnessed a scene beyond human comprehension. Soldiers collapsing without visible wounds, like puppets whose strings had been cut. "What is this?" roared the monarch, terror replacing his usual pride. "What sorcery is this?" An old Assyrian priest who accompanied the army to perform sacrifices to the gods of war, prostrated before the king, his body trembling uncontrollably. "It is the hand of a god, Majesty," he stammered. "Not of our gods, but of the God of Judah, the one we defied." High on the walls of Jerusalem, the watchman observed in puzzlement, the immense Assyrian camp, moments before bustling with activity even during the night, now presented a strange pattern. Entire areas submerged in darkness as torches fell from the hands of dead soldiers, unattended bonfires slowly going out. "What's happening over there?" asked a young Jewish soldier to the more experienced commander. The old warrior, who had fought in many battles, had never witnessed anything like it, but his heart knew the answer, even before his mind could formulate the thought. "It is the Lord," he replied, his voice filled with emotion. "It is the Lord fighting for us, as in the days of Moses." Meanwhile, the angel of the Lord completed its terrible mission. One by one, the soldiers of the most powerful army in the world fell, until 185,000 warriors lay lifeless under the impartial stars. Death made no distinction between generals and recruits, between decorated veterans and young men in their first campaign. And then, as suddenly as it began, it ended. The angel of the Lord withdrew, its task completed. The silence that remained was no longer the supernatural silence of its presence, but the common and terrible silence of mass death. Dawn revealed a spectacle that would never be forgotten by those who witnessed it. The rising sun illuminated a field covered with bodies. Entire rows of soldiers, still in their resting positions, lay as if they had simply fallen asleep, never to wake again. There were no visible wounds, no signs of struggle, only the silent death that had reaped an entire army in a single night. 𝗔𝗃𝗏𝗹𝗶𝗲, the great king of Assyria, was among the few survivors, protected in his royal tent for reasons known only by divine designs. He emerged to contemplate the total ruin of his military power. His face, previously marked by pride and arrogance, now exhibited only shock and terror. 𝗤𝗏𝗏𝗏, murmured one of the few surviving officers, accounting for the losses. The entire attack force, all the archers, all the cavalry, all dead from the top of Jerusalem's walls. Sentinels watched in astonishment the scene unfolding on the plain, where before there had been a sea of tents and banners. Now there was only a field of death. The news spread quickly through the besieged city. "Gabzi," shouted the guards, "come witness what the Lord has done." This night, Hezekiah, accompanied by Isaiah and his counselors, went up to the walls to see with his own eyes the miracle of deliverance. For long moments, the king remained silent, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the divine intervention. Thus the Lord defended Jerusalem, Isaiah finally declared, his voice full of reverence, "Not by the strength of bow or sword, not by the wisdom of men, but by the power of his extended arm." In the Assyrian camp, chaos reigned among the survivors. Officers tried in vain to maintain order, while soldiers fled in panic, convinced that remaining in the vicinity of Jerusalem would mean facing the same fate as their companions. 𝗔𝗃𝗏𝗏𝗏, the conqueror who had subjugated nations, now found himself dominated by fear. His hands trembled as he ordered the immediate retreat. "Prepare my chariot," he ordered, avoiding looking toward the field of bodies. "We will depart for Nineveh before the sun reaches its zenith." An old counselor, the same one who had suggested caution the night before, approached the king with faltering steps. "Majesty," he said, his voice little more than a whisper, "what will we say when we reach Nineveh? How will we explain this defeat?" 𝗔𝗃𝗏𝗏𝗏's eyes flashed with a vestige of his former pride. "We will say that a plague struck the camp, a sudden and deadly disease. "We will never speak of the God of the Jews." But as the words left his lips, the king knew he was lying to himself in his heart. A terrible certainty had settled. He had defied a power greater than all the gods of Assyria, and only by inexplicable mercy was he still breathing. In the streets of Jerusalem, the people began to gather in spontaneous celebration. Songs of praise resonated from homes and the temple. Women danced, children ran freely, and men embraced many, with tears of relief running down their bearded faces. The sun climbed higher in the sky as Jerusalem vibrated with unprecedented celebrations. In the streets and in the temple, the people sang psalms of gratitude, their voices joining in a symphony of worship that seemed to make the very stones of the city resonate. When the Lord brought back the captives of Zion in tone, the Levites in the temple, we were like those who dream. Then our mouth was filled with laughter and our tongue with songs of joy. Hezekiah, dressed in his royal robes, led a solemn procession to the temple. In his hands, he carried an offering of gratitude, so generous that the priests could barely count its treasures. The king, who had wept bitterly at the Assyrian threat, now had tears of joy in his eyes. "Today," he proclaimed before the assembled congregation, "we witness what our ancestors told us, what our fathers learned from their fathers. The Lord is a warrior. The Lord is his name. Who is like you among the gods? O Lord, who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in glorious deeds, worker of wonders?" Meanwhile, a few miles away, what remained of the once mighty Assyrian army retreated in disarray. Abandoned chariots and carts blocked the road, while stunned soldiers walked like men in a trance. The fear of being overtaken by the angel of death, as they now called it in whispers, drove them to desperate flight. Sennacherib, in his royal chariot pulled by 4 white horses, kept his eyes fixed on the horizon, refusing to look back. The great conqueror, who had expanded Assyria's borders beyond what any predecessor had achieved, now fled from a city he had failed to conquer. "History will remember this as a strategic withdrawal," he murmured to his scribe, who faithfully noted on a clay tablet. "Record that a disease struck the camp, forcing us to postpone the conquest of Jerusalem." The scribe nodded, but his eyes betrayed the truth that everyone knew. No natural disease could kill with such precision and speed. No plague could select exactly 185,000 victims, leaving others completely intact. Back in Jerusalem, Isaiah met with Hezekiah in a reserved room of the palace. The prophet's face, normally austere, was serene. "Thus the word of the Lord was fulfilled," he said to the king. "But remember, this miracle was not just for this generation, but for all generations to come. The account of what happened here today must be preserved with accuracy." Hezekiah nodded, summoning his royal scribes record everything he ordered. Every detail, every number. "Let our children and our children's children know that the God of Israel is the Lord of hosts, and that he defends those who trust in him." As the day progressed, some of the bravest citizens of Jerusalem ventured outside the walls to observe the field of death. What they saw defied comprehension. Row after row of soldiers, still in their gleaming armor, lay as if they had been touched by an invisible finger. A young priest walking among the dead noticed something extraordinary. There was no decomposition, no usual stench of death. It was as if corruption itself hesitated to touch those who had fallen by the divine hand. "It is a sign," he said to his companions, "a sign that it was not by human hand that these men perished." The days that followed the miracle were of intense activity in Jerusalem. By Hezekiah's orders, large pits were dug outside the city to bury the dead of the Assyrian army. Although they were enemies, respect for the dead demanded that they receive proper burial. "Even in victory, we must show the dignity that our God teaches us," declared the king to those who questioned why they should bother burying their enemies. As the work progressed, reports began to arrive from other cities of Judah. The fear that had dominated the nation during the Assyrian advance was transformed into celebration. Delegations of leaders from neighboring villages and cities arrived daily in Jerusalem, bringing offerings of gratitude to the temple and gifts for King Hezekiah. The Lord fulfilled his word, said the temple administrator as he accounted for the offerings that arrived. He promised that Jerusalem would be a place where nations would bring their treasures. And look, this is beginning to happen. In the following weeks, messengers from distant kingdoms arrived at the holy city. Even nations that had hesitated to oppose Assyria now sent embassies with gifts and alliance proposals. The small kingdom of Judah, which had seemed destined for extinction, suddenly found itself at the center of diplomatic attention in the known world. Babylonian ambassador representing King 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 presented himself at the palace with magnificent gifts and a sealed letter. "My lord has heard about your illness and miraculous recovery," declared the ambassador, referring to an earlier episode in Hezekiah's life and now about this impressive victory against Sennacherib. He wishes to establish bonds of friendship with a king so evidently favored by the gods. Hezekiah, flattered by the attention, showed the Babylonians all the treasures of his kingdom, a decision that would later be severely criticized by Isaiah. Meanwhile, in Nineveh, capital of Assyria, Sennacherib arrived with the remains of his defeated army. The entry into the city was organized to minimize the appearance of defeat, with the surviving soldiers marching in formation as if returning from a successful campaign. In the halls of the palace, however, the truth was known. Counselors spoke in whispers about the disaster of Jerusalem, and priests of the Assyrian gods performed purification rituals, fearing that the wrath of the God of Israel might follow Sennacherib to his capital. The king himself became increasingly paranoid and cruel. Any mention of the failed campaign against Judah was punished with extreme severity. The scribes received orders to record a modified version of the events, claiming that Hezekiah had been imprisoned in Jerusalem, like a bird in a cage, and forced to pay a heavy tribute. "No one must know the truth," ordered Sennacherib to his inner circle. "Anyone who speaks about an angel or a foreign god destroying our army will face death." But the rumors were impossible to contain. Merchants, diplomats, and spies carried the extraordinary story to all corners of the known world. In taverns of Damascus, on the docks of Tyre, and in the markets of Egypt, men gathered to hear accounts of the night when the God of Israel destroyed the Assyrian army. In Jerusalem, Hezekiah implemented extensive reforms, strengthened by his new prestige. Pagan temples and altars that still remained in the high places were demolished. The city's defense system was reinforced, with special attention to the famous Gihon spring, whose waters the king had diverted through a tunnel to the interior of the city before the siege. "The Lord defended us this time by a miracle," he explained to his counselors. "But that doesn't mean we should relax our vigilance or neglect our defenses." The prophet Isaiah, now venerated as never before, continued to utter oracles that were carefully recorded by his disciples. His words about the future of Israel and the nations, about a coming Messiah and a time of universal peace, gained new credibility after the dramatic fulfillment of his prophecy against Assyria. "Remember," he frequently said to those who gathered to listen to him, "what we have witnessed was not the end, but a sign, a symbol of what is to come when the Lord establishes his eternal kingdom, and all nations will come to the mountain of the Lord." The story of the destroying angel quickly entered the folklore and songs of the people. Mothers lulled their children with stories of how the God of their ancestors had sent his mighty angel to protect his people. Young soldiers swore allegiance, inspired by the account of how a single celestial messenger had defeated an entire army. "Who needs to fear when the Lord of hosts is on our side?" became a common refrain among the people of Judah. 20 years passed since the night of the angel. Hezekiah had died in peace, succeeded by his son Manasseh, whose reign unhappily led Judah back to the idolatry that his father had fought so hard against. The miracle of deliverance, although still remembered, began to fade in the collective memory, becoming more of a legend than living history. In Nineveh, Sennacherib faced his own tragic fate. After years of increasingly tyrannical and paranoid reign, the great king of Assyria met his end not on a glorious battlefield, But in his own temple, the king is dead, ran the cry through the corridors of the royal palace, murdered by his own sons while worshipping his god Nisroch. Isaiah's final prophecy about the Assyrian monarch had been fulfilled. He will return to his land, and there he will fall by the sword. The princes, 𝗔𝗵𝗲 and 𝗔𝗵𝗲𝗃, after killing their father, fled to the land of Ararat, while another son, Esarhaddon, took the throne of Assyria. For the few survivors of the campaign against Jerusalem, the news brought a chill of recognition. The God who had sent his angel to destroy an army had finally reached the king who dared to defy him. The old Isaiah, now bent by age but with still burning eyes, gathered his disciples for the last time. The scroll that contained his oracles and visions was almost complete, including the detailed account of the night of the angel. What we witnessed, he said, his voice weak but clear, was not just for our generation, but for all generations to come. When difficult times come, and they will come, our descendants will read about the angel of the Lord and find courage. They will know that the God of Israel does not abandon his people in the hour of need. Centuries would pass. Jerusalem would fall to the Babylonians, be rebuilt, fall again to Romans and other conquerors. The temple would be destroyed, rebuilt, and destroyed once more. But the story of the angel who killed 185,000 Assyrians in a single night would remain alive in the sacred texts, in the hearts of the people, and in the unwavering faith that at the critical moment, the God of Israel can intervene directly in human history. The story would be recorded in the books of 2 Kings, 2 Chronicles, and Isaiah, preserved so that future generations could know the power of the God who defends Jerusalem. Archaeologists would discover Assyrian inscriptions that, although presenting a distorted version of the events, would confirm that something extraordinary had interrupted Sennacherib's campaign against Judah. And so, thousands of years later, in temples, synagogues, and churches around the world, people would still gather to hear the story of the angel of the Lord of the King, who prayed with unwavering faith, and of the night when 185,000 soldiers met there, and by the hands of a celestial messenger. The prophet had written, "For I will defend this city to save it for my own sake, and for the sake of my servant David." And so it was done, an eternal testimony of divine faithfulness that transcends time and continues to inspire faith and hope to this day. On Mount Zion, where once the Assyrian army planned its final conquest, pilgrims from all nations now come to worship. And on quiet nights, the locals say, if you listen carefully, you can almost hear the sound of invisible wings, a reminder that angels still watch over the city that God chose. I thank all who have followed this historical account based on the events recorded in the scriptures. This work required months of deep research and dedication to recreate with accuracy and drama one of the most impressive miracles in biblical history. If you have enjoyed this content, don't forget to leave your comment, give it a like, and share it with those who need to be reminded of God's power in difficult times. Subscribe to our channel for more biblical stories narrated with the same richness of detail and fidelity to the sacred texts.